Our top story this morning is the first by-election in the 12th Parliament. That is the Kitui West by-election set for the March 26th this year. The nomination exercise for the Wiper Party, which is the dominant party in the region, will be held today. The nominations will see the immediate former Member of Parliament, Francis Nyenze's wife, Edith Nyenze, battle it out with Kenya's first African Chief Justice, Kitui West's son, Maluki Mwendwa. Candidates keen on clinching the party ticket spent the better part of yesterday in campaigns across the country. Our reporter Mrimi Wangi is keeping an eye on the situation in Kitui West, where voting has already begun. And in studio with me is governance expert Javas Bigambo and Nerima Wako Ojiwa, who is the executive director at Siasa Place. Many thanks for joining us and congratulations on the name change, Nerima.
Thank you, Risha. Thank you.
So let's begin with you, Javas, considering that this is the first by-election in the 12th Parliament, and it comes just 5 months, is it, after a grueling election period, in August. So, again, there will be issues of, cost constraints for some of those who are participating in this election. But what are your thoughts about the two front-runners for the Wiper Party, Edith Nyenze and Maluki Mwendwa?
Well, first, a couple of things. One is the entire electoral system. That are we going to see IBC managing the election later on differently from the manner in which complaints arose during the general election, and whether we are outgrowing some of the challenges that we keep having during the general election. Interestingly, though, by-elections usually are managed very well, impressively so. But you wonder, why is it that when all the constituencies are consolidated during the general election, these challenges seem to be so enormous and beleaguer IBC so much. As to the candidates, the two candidates who are squaring it out, one, of course, their profiles are very different. One, of course, being the widow of the late Nyenze, is riding also on the profile of the husband. He had so much goodwill in the constituency. Sorry. And it's expected that because of the kind of grief that she has undergone, the kind of good work that the husband did to the people, that it may pay dividends in this process. But then again, you look at the other gentleman, Mwendwa, and he also comes from a strong political background and a family that is so much respected there. A name that, is a powerhouse, in the politics of Kitui. So the profiles of these individuals alone may not suffice to give the constituents the direction or barometer to choose who is it that will serve them best. But I think looking at the constituency, understanding, for example, how the resources in that constituency need to be used through CDF, etc., the kind of leadership that the people need in terms of service delivery, it is incumbent upon the people then to see that beyond the political profiles that are donated to these candidates, what is it that stands out with them in terms of their vision, or whether they have articulated it very well, impressively, so that it is their vision, their articulation, their passion and their drive that should afford the people the chance to choose the best candidate.
Right, and of course, there hasn't been much time for campaigns. Francis Nyenze unfortunately passed away just on the 6th of December. That's just about 1 month ago. But Nerima, a lot has been said about the decision by Edith Nyenze to throw her weight into this campaign. Her husband garnered about 21,000 votes out of a total of about 52,000. The second coming in at about 6,000 votes, so a rather large margin. But like Bigambo says, do you think their personal profiles alone, both Edith Nyenze and Maluki Mwendwa, would be enough to suffice for the constituents?
Absolutely, it plays a part. And a lot of times, just as Javas has mentioned, it's really going to help Mrs. Nyenze just because of what happened to her husband earlier. However, what we do need to recognize is that there is going to be a voter turnout. It's going to be low. Your reporter just mentioned that very few people are participating. And I believe that as much as the turnover was very quick and very sudden and short, there's not much time for campaigning. It keeps our political parties active. We're used to a country where we wait for a general election before we start to see political parties, their logos, their campaigns, their activity, and the beehive that we see in their headquarter offices. But right now, because we're going to have a number of by-elections, not just that one, we're going to have political parties that are active and continuous with engaging their masses. But that also plays in part with the finances. Are they going to be able to fund these activities? Are they going to be able to engage their populations and encourage them to come out and vote? Because at the end of the day, as much as people feel that they need to pledge allegiance to vote for their party, they have to be pulled to go out and vote. And we've just mentioned how it has been a grueling 2017 when it came to elections. We're tired, completely tired. So what's going to bring people out to vote? And I believe those profiles that Javas has mentioned will play a critical role in that.
All right. And we've had previously of wrangles within the Wiper Party itself, as with many parties outside. But so far, we've had about 8 members of County Assembly in Kitui West who've endorsed Maluki Mwendwa for this position for the Wiper Party flag. And Edith Nyanze then coming in as the widow of Francis Nyanze. Do you think that will be a difficult position for Wiper leader Kalonzo Musyoka, especially considering that these are 2 very important families for the Wiper Party in the region?
Well, I think first, while Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka is the leader of the Wiper Party, he needs not drop his huge hand in terms of giving direction or trying to favor which candidate should actually clinch or be favored to win, this seat. The thing is, it's always very good and charming to have the people themselves decide who is it that they prefer to lead them as a leader at that level. Secondly, you know very well that our history in our politics and by-elections has demonstrated for quite some time, various parts of the country, that those who seem to have been hurt or struck the most by bereavement tend to be favored to win because people come to pour their masses and support to such kind of candidate. But now, it's not always a given, especially when it comes to widows running for such political office to inherit.
Right.
Whether it was the case of the late Ojode, etc., you realize that individuals and our politics is, is patriarchal in nature, that men in the end tend to be favored as opposed to women. I just hope that that will not play out. I am not campaigning for anyone. I'm not here for anyone's bidding. But I would say that if at all it was clear during the 3 terms of the late Nyanze that Mrs. Nyanze was a strong and fundamental pillar that was observable in helping the late leader in serving the people, then that itself will be witnessed by how the votes will be cast. But then again, if at all she was a shadow, a pale shadow during the reign of Nyanze, the 3 terms, then it may be very difficult for her to come out and charm the voters. And that's where then Mwendwa may be favored. Because maybe he may be more energetic, he may use, and together the networks that are there, etc. and whatnot. And it will be a very difficult balancing act if at all now Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka wants to step in, because the 2 sides are sides that have worked with him closely, supported his politics. There have been firm wins and pillars for his political drive, and that's why it would be very wise for him and quite judicious if he were to exercise restraint in terms of demonstrating whom is it that he favors.
All right. Let's focus on the management of this by-election. But like you mentioned earlier, by-elections, historically have been very well managed in the country. Even the by-elections preceding the August 27th general elections. But what are you expecting, Narima, in terms of management, considering that Wiper, being part of the NASA outfit, has been pushing for electoral reforms for the longest time now?
You would hope that the election would be sufficient and effective, but I don't believe so because they've already started with delays. We've heard that the dispatch took a long time, they didn't have the form, so we can already see that if we were to give a report, they are on the side of almost failing. However, one thing that I observed in the by-elections or the party elections or nominations previously is the fact that they're not quite sure who's voting. The fact that you're not sure if the person is indeed a resident of that particular area. And that matters because it means that you can go and get anyone from anywhere to vote for a particular candidate. Right. So is that really credible? And the answer is no. And it's definitely not fair. And then also considering the election, if we think about it, one other thing that stands out to me is the fact that people could actually vote multiple times. We had cases where people voted in those party nominations in Jubilee more than 3 times for a particular candidate. So you don't really have structures in place to make sure that people are voting one time and that vote does count and it's an individual from a particular constituency or area or ward.
That's interesting, Bigambo. Let's factor in on that. The credibility, especially of by-elections, because again, even in the by-elections preceding the August 27th elections, there were issues of we're not sure, I'm a Wiper Party member, but I wasn't in the Wiper Party register. I live in this resident, but a resident, in this ward, but my name was in a register from a completely different ward. And this is something that has affected the credibility and the outcome of many by-elections. Why are we still dealing with this?
You see, it is clear to us as our history documents that we have refused completely to learn from our mistakes. We have refused to learn from our history, and we have refused to learn from the failures in our politics. Because if it were so, we would see political parties ably managing even by-elections and processes and party registers, etc. In fact, since the last time that parties conducted their nominations, most political parties have not come out to clean up, to improve on processes of managing their own internal party affairs. They're all still wrangles and a haphazard manner of management of party records, etc. And that is why political parties and the Register of Political Parties, and including the IBC, who are supposed to be teams and parties in enhancing and strengthening of our democracy, are not always working together. There is no synergy.
Right.
And because of that, we'll always keep on seeing this kind of issues arising, the challenges, etc. It baffles me that a small by-elections process such as this is suffering a major delay and challenges. One constituency? Good gracious. Why is it that a small conduct such as this couldn't be managed in a timely manner? Because you wouldn't say that there is a stretch of resources or human resources or material resources that will prove a challenge. So when things like this happen, then we need to move back a bit and ask ourselves, hey, why is it that we keep getting it wrong and wrong? Why is it still that people are never enthusiastic about stepping forward in an electoral process to choose their leaders who will take them forward?
Right.
And that tells you that we keep on finding ourselves in a crisis of leadership, or people imagining that it matters the less whom you vote for because, one, maybe the party leadership has got a preferred candidate and that your choice matters the less. And secondly, that even if you vote for these individuals, the moment they take the reins of power or the oath of office, they are far less concerned about the plight of the people, and they never stand and work closely with the people, even in the spirit of public participation and engagement. Right. So all these kind of things tells us that maybe moving forward, we may want to rethink how, as a people, we want to manage our politics. Whether the question of ideologies that has been harped on for too long could be an issue that we want to handle or to embrace in the end, or how we can start cultivating a culture of inspirational leadership. Because, let's face it, many times when our political leaders appear even on our television screens or even at party meetings, except for comical effect of their remarks, very many of them are not inspirational to even the younger generation or the people that they lead or compatriots, etc. So we need to see how we can have a charming, moving, progressive and inspirational political leadership in this country. Right. That itself will motivate our people to come out, even in a by-election, to vote enthusiastically for a leader.
And like Murimi said, the turnout not very impressive in that by-election. 52,000 registered voters. Will be keeping an eye on how many will turn up by the end of the day. But whoever emerges victorious in this by-election will have to battle it out against 5 others. I believe we're to have the entire list to also run against Francis Nyenze in August 2017. Wiper Party being the most dominant party in that region. But remember, during the campaign period, we had other parties, even Jubilee Party, saying they are making inroads in NASA strongholds like Kitui County itself. Are we likely to see a possible change of shift in this by-election, Nerima?
I don't believe in this very by-election. I think that we're at a point where people have already made a decision where they stand politically in terms of the party that they affiliate themselves with. A lot of people follow parties that they feel that they identify with. But it's sad that in Kenya it seems to be ethnically based or tribal based. So for that shift to happen within the next few months, I don't believe that it's possible because people have already made a decision within their mind. What is the shift that's going to happen is the fact that people feel inclined enough to actually get out and vote in March. That's going to be the difference. And that's what I believe these other candidates are going to be working on, getting that group that they already have, that the support that they already have, to come out in large numbers if possible.
All right. And of course, analysts are quite skeptical about resource mobilization and getting people to come out and vote, considering this comes just 5 months after a rather costly and grueling general election. Most of those participating still participated in the last general election, so there are cost constraints. Is that likely to affect the ultimate voter turnout in the by-election?
Not necessarily. But even though Wiper Party, the umbrella party, still suffers from challenges of housekeeping, because since the resignation of former Secretary General Hassan Omar and the former chairman, like today, if you were to ask, except maybe for members who are within the sanctum of the party, ask any general Kenyan, who are the leaders of the Wiper Party today, except for the party leader. Hardly will anybody tell you that we recognize so-and-so as our leader. So even parties themselves are having lots of challenges of identity, positioning, branding, management, etc.
Right.
Then the other thing is the question of resources, financial resources. Of course, most admittedly, after an election such as the one we had, there will always be issues of financial constraint. But the way our politics is, it is the individual candidate who foots much of his or her bill, in the election process. Parties don't do so much. It is the individual's financial capacity that either will drive him or her forward or will be a major encumbrance in terms of limitation or in case of a limitation of resources. Right. So here it's a question of who has got, one, the deeper pockets, and two, the political capital that comes with goodwill of the people. So the goodwill here will play a huge part, and the way, of course, much as it's never admitted publicly, but there is too much bribery that takes place in our politics. Our politics is too dirty. The questions of bribery and treatment of voters goes on day and night, especially in times such as this. And that's why the depth of the pockets of the candidates will largely determine who is it that the people favor. And they'll tell you, most admittedly, that so-and-so is the leader that we prefer, but deep inside their hearts, it's a question of so-and-so is the person that I appreciate the most because he or she treated me. Right. And that's why I'm voting for him or I'm voting for her.
And of course, electoral bribery is, bribery is an electoral malpractice. And as much as it starts with us, you know not to bribe, not to receive a bribe, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission has mostly been held accountable as being unable to stop bribery as a form of electoral malpractice. What would this by-election, of course, setting the pace for other by-elections in Uhuru's second term, mean for IEBC itself, Nerima?
It's very, very difficult because even thinking about the natural culture of people, if I talk about even young people during these campaign rallies, as much as we talk about bribery is terrible, and I'm going to talk about it within the party and as a public itself. Within the party, as Javas was saying, actually I think parties get a lot of money from people instead. When you think about people who wanted to vie in a political party, it was as much as 100,000. That was for youth. That was the subsidized price. But then when you're talking about other seats, it was 250,000, 500,000, 500,000. And you're not even guaranteed a particular ticket in a party. Some got direct nominations, and we don't even know how much they paid for that direct nomination, because we know it's not free. And then we also talk about now outside the party, let's bring it back to the people, when they're attending campaign rallies or things like that and accepting, we can talk about funding, are T-shirts bribes? I don't know. Are hats bribes? Because you attend these rallies and you want that T-shirt.
You need to define it.
Define what a bribe is.
Right.
Define what that is. So if I'm being given something to make you vote for me, is that what the bribe is? It's not necessarily the money aspect of it.
Right.
And IBC does have a large task to handle, because not only is it bribery or corruption an issue with our country, it's completely now cultural. It's almost a sense where we have to start from children to understand what corruption is, because a lot of us look at it as in terms of finances, but it's not just that. We are talking about our schools where cheating is such a huge issue, and now we don't even want to get into the education sector, but there are a lot of issues within that which could be viewed as bribery, because we have head teachers who have been offered finances to be able to select students to enter particular institutions. So when we speak about bribery, it's not just the IBC and the electoral process that we need to be concerned about. We have to look at the judicial, the education, the health sector. We have people who have access to certain kinds of medication or funds because they know people within certain areas within the health sector. So,
all right, so we'll be continuing this conversation. I remember this is our top story this morning, the Kitui West constituency nominations there for the Wiper Party. Edith Nyanze and Maluki Mwendwa, the top front runners there, to be battling it out for that position. Edith Nyanze is the widow of the former Kitui West Member of Parliament, Francis Nyanze, who passed away on the 6th of December. She says she wants to continue her husband's development agenda. On the other side, businessman Maluki Mwendwa, coming from the son of former Cabinet Minister Nyiva Mwendwa, coming from a rather reputable family, also throwing his weight into that seat. But let's take a look at the figures now from the 2017 by August general election there in Kitui West constituency. Francis Nyanze, of course, from the Wiper Democratic Party with 21,136 votes. That accounted for 54.68% of the total vote. Remember, the total number of registered voters there is 52,042. We also had Robert Mutiso Leli from Ford, Kenya, who I understand will also be taking part in the March 26th by-election. He garnered 6,525 votes, accounting for 16.88% of the total votes cast. And I also had from Muungano there, Hannington and Mbai Mbiti with 4,498 votes, 11.64%. And we also had from the Jubilee Party, Ben Rogers Mbai with 4,252 votes, and that is about 11% of the total votes cast. And we also had Dennis Muli Mulwa from the ANC, 1,627 votes. That is 4.21% of the total votes cast. And we also had independent candidate Redemptor Musyoka, who garnered 335 votes. And last but not least, Edwin Kinywa Musyoki there with 283 votes. Now, about 5 of these will also be running in the March 26th by-election, a rather tightly contested by-election in the country. Our reporter Mrimi Mwangi is keeping an eye on that situation for us there. Let me get closing comments from you on this particular by-election. I'll begin with you, Jarvis. Again, a lot of expectations from Kenyans because, again, this is the Wiper Party. So we're expecting to see the electoral reforms that they are championing for be sort of manifested in the manner in which this by-election is conducted. But again, before, during the August 27th campaign period, we had a lot of concerns of direct tickets being given to many of the influential members of political parties, so to speak. Here we have two rather influential members of these political parties. And of course, you said Kalonzo Musyoka needs to sit back on this. But what is the likelihood of this playing out like that?
You see, many times I'm very much surprised. And I ask myself loudly, what is this gauge that political parties and party leaders use that makes them give a direct ticket to a particular candidate? What gauge, what political gauge of leadership, of inspiration, of charm, of performance, of productivity? Because most of the time, the individuals who end up being given direct tickets, one, are very wealthy individuals, very close to the party leaders, and individuals who actually are not bothered too much about true service, real service to the people, but real service to the party leader and to the party. And that is why the question of the people being shortchanged arises. Because when a party leader or a political party elects to give somebody a direct nomination, what message are they sending to the people? That actually your decision to choose whoever you want matters the less to us. It's about what the party wants. And that's why that kind of practice chokes democracy, liberal democracy by its nature. Much as somebody would say that through extreme liberal democratic thought, it gives that very right to the political party to determine who is it that must run on its own ticket. And moving forward, we realize that if at all we are looking at the place of justice in a democratic system or process, then the people should be central. And looking at Kitui, for example, and even those numbers that have played out on their percentiles, Nyanza really whipped those that challenged him in the last election.
Right.
I do not expect that kind of whipping will be evident in this by-election. I don't actually expect that somebody will easily garner 54% that Nyanza did in the general election. Of course, we know very well that when we have such kind of repeat elections, there is little enthusiasm, etc. Turnout is low. So the numbers will be possibly less than 50% turnout.
All right.
The other thing is that if political parties, and especially here I'm looking at NASA-affiliated parties, are calling or championing for political reforms and justice, it must be self-evident by the manner in which they conduct their own party affairs. Because you can't be shouting from the rooftops about justice, about credibility, about fair and free electoral process, yet back home, you do not engage in such kind of practice. So we need to see that political parties and party leadership should not speak from double sides of their mouths. If they do that by way of practice that can be observed by Kenyans and the people of Kitui, then we can say you have satisfied your domestic issues in terms of the clarity of the kind of fairness and justice that you're calling for. Now go yonder and preach the same to the entire country.
All right. Of course, I will be looking and keeping an eye on that entire process. Very briefly, Nerima, we keep talking of a very low turnout in by-elections historically. What would it take for Kenyans to be more patriotic, to take more part, or to take part more in electoral processes and not necessarily just a 5-year cycle for general election?
I have to piggyback what Jarvis had just said in terms of the power belonging to the people. Our Constitution, Chapter 1, starts with "we the people." And a lot of times, we don't necessarily feel that we have the voice of our own country. We have sort of left it to the political leaders to banter back and forth. That's all our news is about. It's never about how the people are feeling or what the people are going through or what they want for their own country. And we've lost that sense of power. And it also falls in place with the political parties. Do they involve the public enough to feel that they have the power to elect these leaders and these leaders actually represent them? As soon as a person feels powerless or a voice feels powerless, then they stop speaking. So we begin to see that, especially this comes from my engagements with young people through our entity, where people are talking about not voting again in 2022. So when you start hearing those conversations from people who, some are not even 18, they're not even 18, and some just turned 18, then you begin to worry in terms of what democracy means in our country. As soon as the people feel that their vote doesn't count, then they stop showing up at the ballot box. They stop turning up. So those are concerns that we're going to have in the future when we're talking about participation. And as long as there's no participation, then we might as well just sit back and watch leaders continue to control the country as they've been doing.
All right. Let's end that conversation here for now. There is Aniriba Wako Ojiwa, who is the executive director at Siasa Place, and we've also been speaking to Javas Bigambo, who is a governance expert. They will be joining us